Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at this Pienoiskivääri M91. This is a 22 caliber training rifle conversion of the M91 used by the Finnish Defense Forces. Now, in the 1920s, the Finnish Defense Forces, the nascent Finnish Defense Forces that only had come into being about 1918, 1919, they wanted something for low-cost, low-power rifle training. For a couple reasons. One was that ammunition was expensive and they didn't have a ton of it, and they certainly didn't have a lot of money. Any money they could save on training ammunition would be a big help. And number two, there were some units who were in places around municipalities where it was a lot easier to do, say, reduced caliber 22 rimfire training shooting rather than have to set up or go to a range that was capable of handling full power 7.62x54 rimmed rifle ammunition. So they got to looking at their options, and the first thing that they actually considered were essentially slide-in 22 rimfire conversion kits made by a number of companies in Europe for a variety of rifle actions. I actually have a video on the EL24, which is a conversion kit for the Steyr M95, just like this. Well, the Finns looked at these and they decided the quality wasn't great and they were kind of clumsy and awkward to use. They didn't really like it. And these were being investigated at AVT-1, which was the main Finnish Army, essentially arsenal depot rifle assembly and maintenance center. Well, at about the same time, AVT-1 was working on what was called the Salerno process that they had brought back as technology from Italy, where you could take a worn-out barrel, drill it out, and retube it with a brand new barrel to essentially refurbish a shot-out barrel into a good new condition rifle. These would be used in a series of Finnish rifles, standard M91s, for a couple of years. And they realized they could also just apply this to 22 rimfire conversions. So they went ahead and did that. The government placed a contract for 1,500 of these 22 caliber tubed barrels with AVT-1. They were manufactured in 1926 and 1927. If you're interested in this sort of thing, and well, you're still here watching the video, so you probably are, you should definitely check out my new upcoming book on Finnish small arms entitled Forged in Snow, Finnish Small Arms, 1917 to 2025. It is currently on Kickstarter for pre-sale right now, covers everything from pistols to light machine guns, including the entire scope of Finnish Mosins, from the very first ones made at SAT right after Finnish independence, all the way through some of the experimental conversions to 7.62x39mm done in the 1950s and everything in between, including these as well as the M27 22 conversion trainers. So check it out over on Kickstarter. There's lots of cool options and cool stuff there to choose from, and we are knocking down stretch goals like nobody's business. So check it out. Links in the description text below. Starting at the front, of course, we have a barrel retubed for 22 rimfire. You can see the edge of the barrel liner there pretty clearly, and it's a 22 caliber bore. The front sight is a bit lower than a typical M91. These have a slot for a cleaning rod, but they were not actually issued with cleaning rods because the cleaning rods were all set for 30 caliber bores and wouldn't actually fit in one of these barrels even if you had it, so why bother putting it in there? We have regular sling slots in the rifle, just like a standard M91. The rear sight, of course, is calibrated for 7.62x54 rimmed. The Finns went ahead and scrubbed the Russian range markings off, but they didn't actually recalibrate the sight at all. It was zeroed once for 22 rimfire, and it was just intended to be left on the lowest sight setting. They weren't doing any long range shooting with these at all, so no need to bother really changing the sight up. There are two sets of barrel markings that you will find on these guns. The first batch are guns made by AVT-1. We have a little AVT-1 arsenal or depot stamp down here. These are actually marked 6mm. Now they are chambered for 22 rimfire, standard 22 long rifle, runs just fine. 6mm, sort of just the shortened version of 5.6mm. And then they are also serialized. So 1,500 were made. This is a relatively late one, number 1366. Now, in the case of the Tikkakoski guns made a little bit later on, you don't have the 6mm mark. You have a date, which you don't get on these, and you have a Tikkakoski factory mark, which is a T in a triangle. The receiver is totally standard. They didn't change it at all. They also didn't change the magazine. So it has its original magazine, springs, and follower and all, but this is a single shot rifle. There's no way for it to hold more than one round. And then the buttstock's totally normal. Again, standard sling slot at the back. Now, if we pull the bolt out, we have some changes here. So the bottom rail of the bolt has been modified to be a sliding extractor. This little lip right here sits under the rim of the 22 rimfire case, and when it's pushed all the way into battery, it holds the cartridge in place right there on the breech face, and then when you open the bolt, this pulls the empty case out. When this is in place, the extractor runs all the way up to the barrel like that, and then as you open the bolt, typically there's going to be a little bit of friction holding the case in the chamber. The bolt will come this far back before it physically catches on the extractor and forces that extractor to come back, at which point it comes back far enough to fully extract the empty case, and then you just kind of dump it out of the gun, set a new round on top of that, and chamber it back in like so. There are a number of additional parts numbered in this bolt conversion. So the bolt body itself here is numbered. The extractor gets the last 3 digits. And then the bolt face here gets the last 3 digits. This is our firing pin. So the regular striker, the firing pin has been cut off, sanded down flat, and it instead hits this, which pokes through the new bolt head right there to push the firing pin out that little hole, offset so that it hits the rim of the cartridge instead of the center like you would do with a regular center fire case. So that's the bolt conversion. It's really pretty darn simple. Now, production of the Salerno process barrels, both these 22s and the standard M91s, ended in 1927 because of a huge scandal over the process itself. It was being run largely by Captain Salerno, essentially the same guy who was involved with the Lati Salerno light machine guns, and an independent commission came in and assessed that like a huge percentage of the rifles, not the 22s, but the full power M91s, were essentially scrap and unusable, and most of the rest had to be rebuilt before they could actually be safely used, and so they ended up shelved, and huge scandal. Salerno was charged criminally, was assessed a huge fine, and ultimately it wasn't until basically the Winter War when they went in and reevaluated these things and realized, oh, actually they're kind of fine, and they exonerated Salerno after the fact. It's a long and tangled story of scandal that we will cover in a separate video on the Finnish P25, P26, and P27 Mosins, which are the full power M91s made with this process. But the sort of the side casualty of that whole scandal were the 22 caliber conversions being done using the same process. So that project ends in 1927 with 1,500 of them being made. There would then be a second contract given for just straight up 22 caliber barrels made by Tikkakoski. And that contract was placed in 1929, and the 1,000 barrels were made in 1929 and 1930, with a few stragglers coming in 31 and 32. But in total, approximately 2,500 of these rifles are manufactured and used by the Finnish Defense Forces as training rifles. They're typically issued out like 3 to 5 guns per regiment. It just, whoever was doing rifle training practice would use those guns. They didn't need to equip the whole unit with them. And they were used pretty reasonably up until World War II. Now, when the M27 rifle was adopted, which sounds like it would have been 1927, but was actually several years after that because the project was delayed, part of the planned M27 rifle family was a 22 caliber conversion of the M27 Mosin. And they did make some of those, and we'll cover those in a separate video as well, but they didn't actually make enough of them to fulfill all of the Defense Forces needs. So the M91s remained in service and in use before World War II. Now, after World War II, or actually after the Continuation War, the Finns captured a ton of Russian Mosins as well as ammunition, and they ended up actually developing their own reduced power loading of 7.62 by 54, or as they would call it, 7.62 by 53, that allowed them to use Mosins in a reduced range sort of setting. And at that point, the 22 conversions really kind of fell out of favor. They were not parts interchangeable with standard full power rifles. They were kind of deemed, well, surplus and unnecessary. And so they were mostly removed from service right after World War II, before any of the major international sales of surplus Finnish rifles. So these things were never sold in any sort of retail quantity to guys like Sam Cummings or later firearms exporters. Instead, they were sold largely to Finnish service members at the time who were interested in having a nice 22 plinking rifle. They actually also sold a surprising number of them to theater and film companies to use as stage props. And well, that's where most of the guns went. Now, a few of these would trickle in here and there from relatively rural bases and through into the 1970s. There was never really a huge effort to go like track them all down and bring them all back into the central depot because it just wasn't that big a deal. So a few of them did trickle in over the years and would be sold in bits and pieces, and a handful of them have ended up here in the United States, like this one, but all through private individual importation, not through major surplus batches. So, pretty rare today, pretty cool guns, and they're also very easy guns to shoot because they use totally standard 22 rimfire ammo. So let's go ahead and take this one out to the range and see what it's like to shoot. I'm kind of curious to see how I can actually shoot with this, so brought out some ammo. Give it a try. Got a paper target at 25 yards, 30 yards. All right, so we'll go ahead and push the extractor all the way in. Manually seat the round, I think. There we go. I am going to aim for the center right bullseye. Boop, there we go. So, round in. That has utterly no recoil, like as you would expect. Let's do 5 shots and see what the results look like. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time, they're not going to be great. System works very nicely. All right, shall we go take a look at the target? Well, I might need glasses. These Mosin iron sights are getting a little fuzzy for me at this point, but I was aiming here, so iron sights are set a bit high. But, you know, you're going to learn fundamentals and build skill so much better with a rifle like this than you would with a Mosin in 54R. If you don't have the shooting skills already, 54R is going to be hard to shoot and develop a huge flinch. And having these as 22 rimfire training rifles is really an obvious and excellent solution for an army that wants to build marksmanship skills, as the Finnish army did. So, if you like this sort of thing, definitely make sure to check out the Kickstarter for my brand new book, Forged in Snow, Finnish Small Arms 1917 to 2025, which covers not only this pattern of the 91 22 conversion, but also the Tikkakoski ones and the M27 22 conversions that the Finnish army also did. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.